For years, the go-to advice for investors has been simple. Buy VOO, QQQ, and SCHD and just hold. But there is a problem. Two of those funds are stepping on each other's toes, and you're paying for it in performance.
Oh man, I can't feel my toes.
Today, I'm going to share a 3 ETF portfolio for 2025 and the future that reduces overlap, keeps risk almost identical to that classic portfolio, and has outperformed it by 6% over the last 5 years and 15% over the last 10 years. And if you're comfortable with a little more risk,
You know how much I like risk.
I'll show you a version that's beaten the classics by 26% the last 5 years and 59% over the last 10 years. And finally, if you don't like having all your eggs in U.S. investments,
Foreign investments, $20 million.
I'll also share one international ETF that's been a quiet winner over the past decade. So there's a reason why VOO, QQQ, and SCHD is so popular together. Vanguard's VOO gives you broad U.S. market exposure linked to the S&P 500 index. Invesco's QQQ tracks against the NASDAQ 100 and loads up on high growth tech. And Schwab's SCHD tracks against the Dow Jones Dividend 100 index and provides dividends and stability. And many consider that these three together give you a solid diversified portfolio. But when we dig deeper, a problem jumps out.
Well, that a problem?
There's some significant overlap with VOO and QQQ. Currently, QQQ has a 51% overlap with VOO, meaning just over half the investments you have in QQQ, you already own in VOO. That's like paying for two different fruit baskets, but half the first fruit is in the second basket as well.
Wait a second here.
So let's dig right into this alternative 3 ETF portfolio that has a proven track record of outperforming that popular combo of VOO, QQQ, and SCHD. The first change is a simple one we can make by replacing VOO with SPLG, which is a State Street ETF. Both ETFs track against the same S&P 500 index, but SPLG has a slightly less expense ratio at 0.02% versus VOO at 0.03%. That's like buying the exact same shirt at one store for $30 when it's $29 right next door. Same shirt, same fit. One just leaves you with an extra dollar in your wallet.
I'm so rich I can't stand it.
SPLG gives you the same exposure, but slightly cheaper. And over decades, even a tiny expense ratio can add up. So there's no reason to pay more for the same thing. Next, we can swap out QQQ for VGT, which is Vanguard's Information Technology ETF. What are some of the reasons we'd want to do this? First off, performance. Over the last 10 years, VGT has a total return of 625% compared to QQQ's total of 467%. That's a pretty significant advantage for VGT, and it outpaces QQQ in more recent time frames as well. Another significant advantage VGT has over QQQ is that it has a significantly lower overlap with VOO and SPLG. VGT has a 34% overlap with the S&P 500 index ETFs, and if you recall, QQQ comes in with a 51% overlap. A little bit later, I'll suggest another ETF for those that are okay with more risk that has some phenomenal returns and lowers that overlap even more. So stay tuned for that alternative we'll go over here shortly.
Trust me, you won't want to miss it.
The last advantage VGT has over QQQ is its expense ratio. VGT comes in with a 0.09 expense ratio compared to 0.20% for QQQ. Now, some will mention here, well, what about QQQM? Same investments, same index, but it does have a lower expense ratio of 0.15%. But VGT still beats that one as well. VGT focuses a little more tightly on innovative tech leaders, avoids some duplication, and does it at a lower expense ratio than QQQ. And the final swap I'd recommend would be replacing SCHD with DIVO or DIVO, which is Amplify's CWP Enhanced Dividend Income ETF.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
So why does DIVO get the nod over the dividend community's darling in SCHD? First off, the total return of DIVO has outpaced SCHD since DIVO's inception in 2016. DIVO has returned 171% to SCHD's 159% over that time frame. And if you look at more recent returns, DIVO outpaces SCHD and has really pulled ahead over the last year and 3 years. Over the last year, DIVO has a return of 16% compared to SCHD at 5%. And over the last 3 years, DIVO has outpaced SCHD 39 to 18%. The second reason I like DIVO over SCHD is the higher yield. Currently, DIVO has a yield of 4.6% compared to SCHD's 3.7%. Now, I know many will question the much higher expense ratio that DIVO has compared to SCHD. DIVO's expense ratio is 0.56% compared to SCHD's 0.06%. But remember, the total return performance we compared earlier already has those fees factored in. And if you're wondering why DIVO's expense ratio is so high,
Why so expensive?
it's because it's an actively managed ETF and they use a tactical covered call strategy on individual stocks to help produce income in addition to having investments in high quality large cap companies that have a history of dividend and earnings growth. So although DIVO has expenses much higher than SCHD, the higher yield and the consistent performance outweigh those elevated expenses. And in this 3 ETF portfolio, DIVO plays a very specific role, income generation. And historically, it's done that very well.
You're gonna draw a very nice income.
Now, here's something interesting. When you put these 3 together, SPLG, VGT, and DIVO, the combined beta is 0.99, basically identical to the original portfolio's 0.98. In other words, you're taking on almost the exact same risk profile, but historically, this proposed portfolio has delivered more, 6% higher over 5 years and 15% higher over the last 10 years. Now, one criticism of both of these 3 ETF portfolios is that they're almost entirely U.S. focused.
Got plans to go international, babe.
So if you want to add some international diversification, one option I really like is FNDF, which is Schwab's Fundamental International Equity ETF. And unlike some international funds that have really lagged badly the last few years, FNDF has actually been one of the best performers over the last 10 years amongst international ETFs. Adding it gives you exposure outside the U.S. without sacrificing returns. So if you're in the camp of wanting some international exposure, you could add FNDF as a 4th option to this portfolio. Earlier in the video, I mentioned if you had an appetite for more risk, I have another ETF that you could swap out VGT for, or if you wanted to be a little less risky, add it as a 4th ETF. That ETF would be SMH, which is VanEck's Semiconductor ETF. The risk with SMH is higher because it's solely focused on the semiconductor industry, but that risk has totally been worth it with some incredible growth over the last 10 years. Being that SMH is focused on the semiconductor industry, it has very recognizable names with top holdings like NVIDIA, Taiwan Semiconductor, AMD, and Broadcom. Remember earlier, I showed you the total return of VGT over the last 10 years was a very impressive 625%. Well, SMH almost doubled that, coming in with a 1,233% return. That's not just beating QQQ and VGT, that's lapping it on the track and waving as it goes by. SMH does come in with a higher expense ratio of 0.35%, but clearly that performance has justified that higher expense. And another benefit SMH brings to this portfolio is it has even less overlap with SPLG and DIVO. There's only a 14% overlap with SPLG, and it has no overlap with DIVO. So, if you believe semiconductors are the backbone of the next decade,
Yes, I do.
from AI to EVs to cloud computing, SMH could be your supercharged growth engine. Here's the best part. Even when you replace VGT with the higher octane SMH, the combined beta of the portfolio only ticks up slightly to 1.06. Yet the performance difference has been massive, 26% higher over 5 years and 59% higher over the last 10 years compared to the original VOO, QQQ, and SCHD portfolio. And I'll even throw in a bonus ETF as another possibility. That would be SMH's little brother, SMHX. It's a relatively new ETF with an inception date of about a year ago, August of 2024. The risk is a little higher with SMHX because it has even a more narrow focus in the semiconductor industry, just focusing on the companies that design and develop semiconductor chips, but avoids those companies that are actually the manufacturers of semiconductors. So why would you possibly consider investing in SMHX? Well, it has almost doubled the return of SMH since its inception, up 45% in less than a year, compared to SMH, which has been up 25% over that same time frame. You may be asking, how impactful could these changes really be that we've been talking about? Let's walk through a few examples where we assume each ETF has $10,000 invested in them in both of the portfolios we've talked about. What would they be worth if we did this 5 years ago? For the VOO, QQQ, and SCHD portfolio, that $30,000 would have grown to $59,236. What about the SPLG, VGT, and DIVO portfolio? It would have grown to $62,620. That's a 6% improvement. What if we move that out to the last 10 years? The original portfolio would have grown to $120,644. And how about that new proposed portfolio? $138,664, a 15% difference. And if you really want to be blown away, let's replace VGT with SMH in both of those scenarios. After 5 years, the combo of SPLG, SMH, and DIVO would have been worth $74,436, a 26% improvement over the original portfolio. What about 10 years? A whopping $191,693. That's 59% better than the original portfolio. And remember, this is with just an initial investment of $10,000 in each ETF. These numbers become even more inflated if you continue to invest in these ETFs on a regular basis. But remember, past performance doesn't guarantee future results. If it did, I'd be recording this video from my yacht instead of my office.
Yeah, it's my yacht, yeah.
So in summary, by replacing VOO with SPLG, replacing QQQ with VGT, and replacing SCHD with DIVO, we end up with a better performing portfolio with basically the same risk. And if we replace VGT with SMH, we supercharge the growth possibility with a relatively small increase in risk. And finally, if you'd like to have some international exposure in your portfolio, adding Schwab's FNDF could be a great choice. If you found this video helpful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of my future breakdowns. And if you want to dive deeper into high growth side of this portfolio, check out this video that I'll have listed here and in the description where I cover SMH's little brother, SMHX, in detail. It's a must watch if you're considering plugging that into your portfolio. As always, thanks for watching and hanging around till the end. Remember, I'm here to make content focused on your money and how to manage it best. See you in the next one.